So last week NIO Stock was down around about 3%, but it's still up around 29% for the month. So it's still trying to trend upwards, but last week it's taken a slight breather. And if we look in the chart, we can see since the reversal bar and price finding support at $3, it has been trying to trend up until this point 2 weeks ago, where it met resistance at around about $4.43. So in line with my analysis over the last few weeks, it looks as if now it's just pulling back for a few weeks before hopefully finding support, perhaps around this level here of 362, before pushing up once again, looking for that $5 level under the trend line. So in this video, I'll unpack the price action of last week and see whether it can achieve that $5 mark by earnings. Let's take a look. Now, before we start, if you find value in my analysis of NIO Stock and other stocks, you may also find value in my trading tips email newsletter. I'll leave a link in the description below. I share the best trading tips that'll help you become a better trader in 30 days. Check it out. So if we check out the daily chart of NIO, we can see since the $3 reversal, price has been trending up nicely. Lots of green bars moving up here, up until the peak right here of 2 weeks ago, the peak of $4.44. And last week, if you look at the individual days, we can see here, Monday was a red bar, Tuesday it reversed slightly, indecision on Wednesday, but last week, Thursday and Friday were both green bars with some resistance here around about the $4.10 level. So you can see overall, price has moved up since that significant low, has come back, taken a breather in the last 2 weeks, and Thursday and Friday was trying to move up once again. And on the weekly chart, we can see last week NIO fell by around about 2%. So what we might find in this week's price action is the buyers come back in and price moves up, perhaps to take out this high here of 424, or in a more bullish scenario, the buyers come back in strongly and price exceeds this price peak here of 444. So essentially we've had about 4 weeks up from the significant low up to this peak here of 444, and then last week it has pulled back to this low here of 382. We might have another red bar this week coming up. Perhaps price will move a bit further, maybe down to this point here. And you can see on the chart, I've marked up this key level of the round number $4. You can see in previous weeks, price has found support here on multiple occasions. Now, last week, it did open above $4 and then it closed just below. So I think what we need to see this week is for price to move up above this $4 level to give us confidence that the price movement towards $5 is more likely. If we don't see this next week, then there's higher chance that price might fall away, perhaps down to around about 375. But right now, overall, looking at the price action since this reversal bar here at $3, NIO's looking as if it is trying to make a move up. We've had 1, 2, 3 weeks up. Last week was a down week. So this week could be another red bar, another down week, before the buyers come back in and keep the price pushing up towards $5. And checking out the monthly chart of NIO, looking at the big picture, you can see that this level here of around about $3.60, where price hit a low here April 24, also August 24, and more recently in March 25. So this is a key long-term level. Right now, price has reversed in April and closed above the $4 level. Obviously May, we've got a few weeks to go. I think what we want to see is price close above this $4 level for the month of May to get confirmation that the move up to $5 is on. If it closes below this $4 level, then hopefully it will close above this level here of 360. However, if price does break this level here of 360, the likelihood is it's going to move down and test the $3 level again. So We'll watch this closely over the next few weeks to see how price unfolds. Overall, looking at the weekly chart, it does look as if, having found support here and made this new peak, it's now pulling back to find short-term support before the next leg up towards $5. So last week, NIO did increase by 3.27% and is also up 18.84% on the month. And since hitting this significant low of $3, it is starting to form a short-term uptrend towards $5. So in this video, I want to unpack last week's price action and just check NIO's progress towards the Q1 earnings date. Let's take a look. Now, before we start, if you find value in my analysis of NIO Stock or other stocks, please consider subscribing to my Trading Tips email newsletter. I'll leave a link in the description below. Check it out. So we can see on screen on the weekly chart, NIO was up 3.2% last week and is starting to form a short-term uptrend towards the underside of the downtrend line. We can see since price hit that significant low of $3, it has formed 3 green up bars, with 2 weeks ago the first pullback with this red bar here forming a higher base and the first higher trough. However, last week price pushed on again and it closed 3% above the previous week close, showing that buyers are getting back in and trying to push the price higher. And if we look closely on the daily chart, we can see that overall last week price trended down overall during the week. It opened quite high on the Monday at around $4.23 and then trended down over the week, closing on the Friday at $4.10. So compared to the week before, up around 3.2%. And we can see if we look closely on the daily chart, NIO is starting to trend upwards on the daily chart, with some resistance found here at $4.45. However, it did pull back into this level here of 382, has moved up and now formed a higher base last week. And looking back on the weekly chart, we can see that this peak created here 3 weeks ago is the most recent level of resistance, around about $4.45. Now since this peak, we can see there was some selling interest last week, 2 weeks ago, and price did fall to a low of around about $3.80 before closing around about halfway up the down bar. And last week we got a green bar with price moving up. So right now we can see that on the weekly chart we do have a short-term trend emerging, pushing towards that $5 level. So based on the price action on the weekly chart, I'm expecting price to move up like this. So we've had our first peak here at 445, we've had our first pullback into this low of 380, and now I expect price to move up over the next couple of weeks and potentially come close to around about $5 around about the earnings date. Now, let's not forget, NIO is still in a long-term downtrend, and the price action we're seeing over the last 6 weeks is a short-term counter trend. And the reason why I'm creating this thesis of NIO pushing towards that $5 level is because in the past, when it has trended downwards, the counter trend has always gone towards the underside of the trend line. So you can see here, price back in May 23 trended down to around about $7. But then the counter trend took it back up to this peak here of around $15. And this happened again, it trended down. There was a 3-week counter trend back up before trending down again into this key level of 360. And you can see here, out of this low formed in August 2024, there was a significant counter trend over around 8 weeks before price moved up swiftly and found resistance at the underside of the trend line, corresponding to this peak of 770, which is the most recent peak. So we can see since this peak here of around 550 back in March this year, price has fallen away, found support at $3, and now we can see the latest counter trend is forming, moving up towards the underside of the trend line, around about $5 in theory. Now you can see here I've marked up this key price level for NIO at $4. On multiple occasions it has fallen and found support before creating the trend reversal. So since it came into $3, it did break that. It's reversed from there, and now in the last couple of weeks it has been trading around that $4 level. And importantly, last week it traded up to the peak of 427 and it closed for the week at $4.10. So that's promising. Buys are coming in after this small pullback, and the price has closed above for the week, above this $4 level. So based on this current trend emerging, where we've got 4 green bars, 1 red bar, and now another green bar, it does suggest that price is going to keep moving up towards $5 and potentially reach the underside of the trend line around about the earnings date, around $5. And of course, following the earnings report, when we get more fundamental data, this could be a catalyst for the price to either move up or down quite swiftly. Clearly, if the results are positive, we might get a breakout above the trend line and price will move up swiftly. In contrast, if the earnings report is negative, we might get a sell-off and price might fall away towards the $3 level support again. We know right now that NIO sales are increasing and the deliveries are looking good for Q1, but we also know that it's unlikely there's going to be huge reductions in outgoing costs by the Q1 announcement. Hopefully in the Q1 report, NIO management does show that it's making progress to reducing losses, and there is progress towards the possibility of profitability by Q4. I think this will please investors and may attract some back in. And if this happens, we might see price level out or we might see it increase. Of course, a positive earnings report doesn't always mean that price moves up. Sometimes it can do nothing and sometimes it can fall away. So earnings on June the 5th will be a key date for NIO. Last week, NIO stock was down 6.3% and down around 15% over the last 3 months. After a big surge from this level of $3, it looks as if it's running out of steam and is struggling to hit the $5 target from my previous videos. So in this video, let's unpack last week's price action, look at some key levels, and look at where NIO might be heading next. Let's take a look. Looking at the big picture with NIO, we can see on the weekly chart that NIO is still in a long-term downtrend, and it has been trending down since that significant all-time high of $66 back in January 2021. So since that time, price has progressively been moving lower with consecutive lower highs and lower lows, trending down in a quite uniform manner. And you can see on screen, I have applied a long-term trend line in orange to signify that price is moving down step by step. Now, zooming in on the chart and looking at the more recent price action, we can see NIO had a significant price peak back in September 2024, where price reached around $7.70 for that week. And we can see since that high, it has been trending downwards into the most recent low of $3. And since that $3 low, it has looked as if NIO is forming a short-term counter trend, trying to move back up towards this area here around about $5, which corresponds with the underside of the trend line. Now, if you've watched some of my previous videos, I've already discussed the fact that in this long-term downtrend, we do have multiple counter trends where NIO has formed a low and pushed back up. Buyers have come back in, seeing value at these low prices. It's moved back up to test the trend line, been rejected, and then made another leg downwards. So you can see it did it here, moved down here, counter trend, move down here, counter trend, and so on. So next, let's mark up some key price levels just to see where NIO is trending exactly at the moment and where the levels of support and resistance are. So I'm going to mark up this significant peak here of around about $16, which corresponds to the price peak back in July 2023. Next is $7. You can see here price retraced a couple of times to find support back in May 23 and also in December 2023. I'm also going to mark up that significant peak formed in September 2024 around $7.70. Next, I want to mark up this level here, which is around about $3.60. And you can see price has fallen into this price level a couple of times and found support, both in April 2024 and also August 2024. And next I want to mark up the most recent low of $3, which has been formed back in April 2025, so last month. I also want to mark up 550, which corresponds to this peak here back in March 2025. And finally, I want to mark up the level here where price appears to have found a level of resistance in the past few weeks, and that's around $4.45. So now with these key price levels on NIO's chart, we can see currently the price is trading between this key level here of 360, corresponding to those two lows back here, and it's below this intermediate level here of around $4.45. Now since that low a few weeks ago in the start of April at $3, it was forming a short-term counter trend. We had 1, 2, 3 strong weeks up with buyers coming back in and buying up the stock. We had a 1-bar pullback, and then 2 weeks ago price tried to push up higher, but it didn't get going. And now last week it's fallen by about 6.3%. And it does look as if now it's struggling to move up towards this level here of around about $5. Now in the past few videos, I've been a little bit more bullish on NIO reaching that $5 target based on the fact that each time there's been a short-term counter trend, it has got close to this level here of the underside of the trend line. And that level would be around about this point here, around about $5. But based on the fact that 3 weeks ago, it hit this level here of 445 and it's found resistance. And since that time, it looks as if it's struggling to keep going. I think next week's going to be critical. We've got this level here of $3.60. Now this price level is a key level of support for NIO. I say that because if we look back in time, April in 2024 and also in August 2024, price has fallen into this level on 2 occasions and found support. It found its support here, counter trend back up, came back down again, found support, and then another trend back up. So it's come down here on 2 occasions. Now, it has fallen through this key level of 360 back in March this year, and since then traded back up. So in the next few weeks, we're going to see 2 scenarios. Is this 360 level going to offer support for NIO, and price is going to fall into it, find support, and then have another attempt moving back up to try and hit $5? In other words, we might see something like this unfold. Back into support of 360, and then a second leg up towards this $5 target. So if it does do this type of movement in the next 6 weeks, that would coincide with the Q1 earnings report, which, remember, we expect to be relatively negative or neutral in terms of the losses that NIO is probably going to post in its earnings report. We don't expect them to be significantly reduced, but they are working towards profitability by Q4. So we might see them coming down, making steps towards profitability, with those losses being reduced from, let's say, 900 million down to 500 million. That would be a step in the right direction. After this time, we still might see price fall away, corresponding with this stronger, longer term trend. Don't forget, this long-term trend here with the orange line, this is still in place. It is a strong trend. Each time price has come to test this level, it has been rejected and fallen away. So with this trend still in place, we must expect it to keep falling unless something changes, unless there's a catalyst. So short term, if it falls away in the next week, let's say a week or 2 weeks, it finds support at 360, it then could try again to hit $5, but after which time it might fall away again back down to this level. And that's in line with the long-term trend. Now, the more bearish scenario, which might unfold over the next few weeks, is that next week we see another red bar, maybe 2 red bars over the next 2 weeks, and price falls away and breaks through this key level of 360. Now, if that happens, the probability is that NIO is going to fall back down to this level of $3 and test that level again. So in a more bearish scenario over the next 6 weeks, we might see something like this. It might fall through 360 in the next 2 weeks, come back up, have a brief rally to retest this level and then fall away again towards $3. This is possible. So the next 2 weeks are going to be critical for NIO. Is price going to hold above this level of 360, or is it going to fall through? If it falls through, it's more likely then to carry on falling towards $3. So if you're wondering whether you should buy NIO right now, it's probably best to wait a few weeks to see what price action does, to see if it holds above this level. Now, even if it does hold above 360, the likelihood is that a rally that occurs at this level is probably only going to move back up towards the $5 level. So there could be a short-term trade there. Now, if you're an investor considering adding NIO to your portfolio, should you buy now? I think overall, the risk at the moment is towards the downside. So it could be a dangerous play to buy NIO now. Yes, you could get a great price, but based on the chart, it does look as if it is bearish at the moment and might fall further. Now that might change over the next few weeks. We might get a catalyst inside the Q1 report. We might not. I think it's more looking like the Q1 report is going to be relatively neutral. I think they're going to post good sales growth, and I think management is going to post losses that are reducing and working towards that Q4 profitability. So that's positive. So overall, the next 2 weeks are going to be critical for NIO and will confirm direction. It might fall away further, and if it does, you could look at it as a positive buying opportunity to buy up the shares at a cheap level. But that is relatively high risk because it is in a long-term downtrend. So I think overall, over the next 2 weeks, we're going to find out whether NIO can hold above 360 and then perhaps move up and try again to get to $5 around earnings time, or it's going to fall through 360 and potentially test $3 once again. Only time will tell. So last week, NIO Stock was down by 7%. It's now down around 12% for the month and down 22% for the last 3 months. It looks as if now NIO is heading down to test that level of $3 after breaking the 360 support level. So in this video, I want to look at the price action for last week and try and ascertain where NIO is heading next, particularly with the upcoming Q1 earnings report. Let's take a look. So if we zoom in on NIO's weekly chart, we can see last week that price action did break through this key level of $3.60. So it does look as if now NIO is heading downwards and there is more downside. Potentially price may move down to test the $3 level once again. It might fall short and get some support around 330 and then move back up, find resistance here before coming back down again. That's one possibility. Right now, the likelihood is, after this last move, is that NIO is going to come down to around here, retest this level and come down to $3. So what we might see over the next 6 weeks is price action like this. This is my bearish scenario for NIO based on the current price action. It's gone through that 360 key level, and therefore the probability is that price is heading down to test $3 once again. And this short-term price action would be in keeping with NIO's longer-term trend, which as we know is bearish. We can see, zooming out, looking at the weekly chart of NIO, since that all-time high of around $66 back in January 2021, NIO has been in a long-term downtrend. There's been some counter trends coming back up to test the trend line, but each time it's come down and pushed back up, it has been rejected, confirming that the sellers are in control long term. Now zooming back in, we can see that since that low of $3, NIO did have a strong 4 weeks, pushing up to that peak of 445. Then we had a 1 bar counter trend, testing what the sellers have got before buyers came back in and tried once again. However, price didn't get through 427 and didn't get through this level of 445. So NIO had a chance to push up and try to get towards $5, but the selling was just too strong. There wasn't enough commitment from the buyers to take that price up to that $5 level on the underside of the trend line. So now, since that peak, we can see sellers are back in control and the price is moving lower. Now, interestingly, if we look at the NIO daily chart for last week, bearing in mind it was a 4-day trading week last week, with Monday being closed on the exchange, we can see that on Tuesday the 27th, it was overall bearish, with price overall moving down. Then we did have a little bit of buying interest, but eventually price closed back down near the open. And then price did move higher on the Thursday, but was met with selling pressure once again. And it wasn't until Friday the 30th where price collapsed and dropped through the key level support of 360. So big selling pressure on Friday that took the price down. Now, with the Q1 earnings report due in a few days, we might see a catalyst in that report to attract new investors back into the fold to buy up the stock. I think most people agree that the earnings report will show heavy losses once again, hopefully less than 900 million compared to the last quarter, but heavy losses nonetheless. However, with the sales growing and with the possibility that NIO management will offer guidance for the rest of the year, and if that guidance is positive in terms of the path to profitability and the steps they're going to take to reach profitability by Q4, that might attract investors back into the fold. Some investors might think that, okay, the price is low now, it's great value compared to what it was. If profitability can come in Q4, there's a high chance that the price might reverse, and obviously getting in now is going to give you great value. But overall, there's still risk here. We must remember that NIO is in a long-term downtrend, and even the shorter to medium-term trends are always going to conform to that longer-term trend, which is down. And we've seen that over the last few weeks. We've had that counter trend rising up from $3, creating that peak at $4.45, but once again, the sellers took over and they pushed that price back down, confirming the big picture of a downtrend. So if the Q1 earnings are positive and the guidance within that report is positive, and NIO spells out exactly how they're going to achieve profitability by Q4, we could have a bullish scenario on our hands. So we might see price fall again next week and perhaps find some support around 330, perhaps in between these two levels here. There's not a level like a markup here where it's clear that price has changed direction in the past. But next week's price bar is obviously going to include the week of when NIO reports its earnings for Q1 2025. So we'll either see another red bar as price moves down on negative sentiment, or it could be positive sentiment in that the guidance is positive, sales are up, and losses are shrinking. And I think that will attract investors back in, and potentially we could see a green bar next week. We might see price reversing. Now, if it does reverse next week and buyers come back in, seeing value at this price level with the updated guidance, what could happen? So potentially price could reverse next week on positive news. So it might come down to potentially here and then reverse back up and come into this zone around about perhaps $4, corresponding to this support level here and here. So it might move to $4, then come back to test the selling interest and perhaps find support at 360 before pushing off once again to test 445 and again towards this sort of $5 zone around here. That's possible. We could see more interest in NIO stock following the earnings report, and we could see an increase in price short term. But let's not forget, that strong long-term trend is still down. So it still might surge short term, but meet resistance in and around this long-term downtrend. And for price to break above the long-term trend and really take off, we need to see a catalyst. We need to see some really positive news come out regarding NIO. It could be a significant reduction in losses. Perhaps they cut the losses in half. Perhaps sales double. Perhaps the ET9 and Firefly sales really look strong for the next 2 quarters. Or perhaps NIO will announce a new partnership deal which will shore up finances for the next 2 to 3 years. There's lots of things that could happen that could be the catalyst for a breakout. But overall, right now, for NIO, the risk is still towards the downside. It looks as if the price is heading for $3. However, things can change quickly. With the earnings report due next week, Positive news could send the stock soaring, or it could send it moving down. I think if you're an investor, considering NIO right now, it's probably best to wait till after the earnings report to confirm direction. That might give you a safer entry and provide more information on what the stock might do over the next 12 months and if that path to profitability is realistic. Thanks for watching.